Hello and welcome to part 3 in the post-production chapter inside of the texture series. And we will discuss here how to change maybe a profile if we got some material from someone else, because my suggestion is select one profile, maybe Adobe RGB, for example, and then stick as long as possible with it, because as we will see, the things that we try to do might change and we get then a different reading from it. Not very funny. Okay, let's get started with it. If you have followed in detail the episode before, then you might have noticed that I have my Adobe Camera Raw set to Pro Photo. This is certainly done on purpose because I want to show you something here. And when we have to deal with profiles, the edit area here is of course our main target. Color settings is the first one that we need to discuss, but I want to show you of course what we have here. This image is now in Pro Photo, and this is a huge and wide space, color space, as we have discussed this. And of course we want to go to Adobe RGB, and if you like, of course, to sRGB if that is your preferred version here. I switch this off for a moment because we have some work to do before we do this, and that is work based here on the episode, not on the picture. The color settings here, and the color settings here are pretty much what we have discussed in the theoretical part and later on, and we are mostly interested for Cinema 4D in RGB. And here I have set up RGB for Adobe, which is not the largest color space, but it's also not the smallest, so it's a good compromise for our textures here. You might see maybe a different target here. Maybe Pro Photo is your preferred. I like this as well a lot, and I change from time to time based on the target that I have. But for 3D work, Adobe RGB is certainly a very good choice. The next part is the color management policies, and this is pretty much the rule. What happens if you open a new image in Photoshop or when you want to paste something or so? The simple answer here is, of course, if you work all the time in the same color space in Adobe RGB, for example, then you have no need to change anything. And preserve embedded profiles means, of course, if you get any file with a complete different profile in RGB, then it takes exactly this profile. So you are not in your working space. That's not a bad thing by itself. And it has some advantages. For example, someone asks you to work a little bit on one image, and you save this image and you give it back to him or her. Then the color profile that was inside of this will be exactly the same. Perfect. He is happy or she is happy, and no one gets harmed. In the moment you set here this to convert to working RGB because you are used to it, then it will be converted to this color space. And when you save this and give this then to someone who has a complete different idea about color space, then you run maybe in trouble because he has to convert it back, and that's always a little bit loss in the picture, as we have seen before, and I will show you that here again if you have just skipped maybe the theoretical or the capture part. Happens, I know that, so I will repeat here something, and sorry when you hear it again. And then we have here some checkboxes, and I think they are pretty much self-explanatory. The more options is of course very interesting, and we have discussed this already. That handles everything when we convert something. If we stay always in one profile, then we have not to deal with anything here. Okay, so I fold this back and I say cancel because I don't want to change anything in my color space here. What we need to do here is, of course, first to check what we get here. And when I click here on my little gray field, I see 152 here. That's way over the top. So I need urgently to change this. And I know I need also to change now the color space because that's Pro Photo and I want to have something else. That's my target here. So I would first go and say convert to profile, because assign profile means here we assign a new profile to something. And that means it doesn't take any advantage of what we had before. And when we take here maybe a Kodak, where you can see immediately what happens, then the whole area of the pixel stays exactly the same as we can see here in the histogram, but the picture change, not really what we want to have. We want to convert it when we want to have one profile that was okay, and when we want to have our destination space here as the main space. So what I have done here now is of course changing here these values, and I'll show you that when we click here OK, this changes, and it changes dramatically. That is in 16-bit certainly not a big pain, but it's of course a change, and with a change you run maybe into trouble to get bendings or some other trouble. Must not be, can be. And this is maybe the time to come back to something that I have started after the theoretical part, and I like this simple texture here from the paint with all the light in it. And with the shadow it excludes itself, of course, as a texture, except when we have exactly the same light direction in a scene. But what I want to demonstrate here is, of course, that we have here with specular highlights and all of that, in this simple scene where you think, oh, that can't be that much, we have a lot of dynamic range. And let's have a look to this, to the HDRI histogram. And we see here it starts always with the darkest values, maybe only few, very few dark ones. And then we have here that is roughly around -3 where it starts to roughly, I would say, +7. So that's a lone 10 stop of massive pixels. And then the highlights, which we can't see here very well, goes up to +9. So from -9 to +9, we have a huge dynamic range here for just this simple texture. And of course, if I had cutted it here, let's say -2 to +8, this should be doable with one exposure if done nicely and well. But in the moment I dial in the 50% gray card, or as we will see, the 45% gray card, or 0.18, it's always this discussion. You might remember this paint job here and why I liked to show you that, because it's just white with the shadow and it has a huge dynamic range for this simple stuff here. And black and white, when we want to have details in the black and when we want to have details in the white, then we need a huge dynamic range. The Macbeth chart, so I was told, has around 5 stops only. That would be here from 0 just to here. So what we try to get here is of course way beyond from that, and we use then a gray card first to stabilize the whole situation and get a standardization in it. That's very important. With that we limit, of course, our ability to just squeeze in all these dynamics inside of one exposure. And that has finally as result that we have to take maybe 2 or 3 at all to get everything in the best way. HDRI is then the answer. And there we have to deal with the gray point. So I close this here and I go to Photoshop because I want to show you something. When we go here, we have a huge dynamic range, as I have established that already. That's nice and neat. But more importantly, when I want to go here to this file, then I want to have, of course, here with the Macbeth chart, then stable values. And stable values means to me, in the moment I have used the gray card here to establish something very close to an optimal gray point, then we have here some values, and it's around 117. It is supposed to be in sRGB around 122 for R, G and B. So we get here a different value. And now I hear you, that should be 127, 127.5, 128 or something like this when we talk about mid-gray. I will show you that the truth is a little bit different, and it is of course different for all the values inside of each and every profile. But more importantly, let's make the test here, go to 32-bit per channel, because anything in gamma is really not usable to adjust any exposure, because we move then stuff around on a curve, and it moves faster or slower, so we get a distortion into the whole system here. Now with a profiled image inside of 16-bit to 32-bit, we have really a linearization inside of this. And when I take now here my color picker and I go here, I have something pretty close to 18% without any adjustments. I promise I have done nothing here. This could be here a little bit higher, but the blacks are also nice. You can see here, this is the black from the frame here, and these are the values inside of the black chip. And you can see the X-Rite color checker has darker values here from that plastic that covers all these guys here. So they had certainly an option to make this here totally dark and black, but that's not the target. Black should have a little bit life in it, so we can work with it. Black 000 is dead, is nothing, has no saturation, no nothing, no mood, and that's of course not what we want to have for textures when we want to illuminate stuff in Cinema 4D. Then we want to have a little bit back, and we can crash this later on. So this has worked nicely here, and I can tell you I have done this without the gray card in my previous life and I run into trouble because then this value here was not 18, it was something else. What can we do when it's higher and we have to adjust this? In 32-bit we can use here of course the exposure. The exposure will not work in 16 or 8-bit. You might tell me it works. Yeah, it functions, but it doesn't work. I hope that makes the difference. The exposure is created for 32-bit, and this is a linear adjustment here. If you use it in a gamma space, 8 or 16-bit integer, then it will destroy your work. You might like it, but it's not really usable for reproductional photography. So you can check out if something changes here. Nothing does, and that is exactly what we wanted. Negative 0.02, yeah, we were a little bit over it, so 0.18 and a half was pretty much the value, so this is now taken away. Now we are really on spot on, and I encourage you to not do this here, because then you see we take all the nice stuff away where we could have worked with. And in the whites, we don't want to have everything clipped and crashed if you stay finely in 16-bit. This is not what we want to have. So the only idea here is to take just a value, take a measurement, what you need, and then we are well and off. And we have seen that we had here for the 18%, and I measure this again. Wait, I have to go here to the background, because otherwise I get only one as measurement. So when I measure this, now we are much closer to 18. So why is 18 not 0.5? I will show you that in a sec. So this is a little calculator which gives me a wide variety of answers. And when I say 0.18, this is the value that I want to have. To the power of 1 divided by 2.2, because 2.2 is the gamma that we have here. Then I press click OK. It connects to the main server and it tells me here the number is 0.458656 and so on. So this is now a number that is maybe not really exactly 0.5. That would be here. So what would we get finally when we have 256 values here? Then we have to say times 0. And I repeat here the number 458 and then 656, and I could have here more digits, but I think it's already okay to go with this, and I get here 117.4. And when you have seen that the reading was 117 or 118, then we are spot on with this. And we are not really spot on because as I get not tired, it depends. It depends on the color profile. So let's make a little test, and I think then we are relatively savvy with the whole scene here. For the test, I call up here a new document, and I want to have it not too big. RGB color in 16-bit is fine, and Adobe RGB is perfect. So I click OK. And then I want to have here my 50% gray, the 127. I know some people would argue with me it's 127.5 or 127 plus 1, 128. I don't care what is finally okay, because what I want to show you here is how variable the whole value is in terms of the same impression that we get from it. So I say okay, I press the Option and the delete key to fill here this area, and then we get here a straight line. This line is very important to keep in mind and in your eyes. And here the value is 127. So what I will do now is, of course, check again, 127. I do not change here anything. What I will do here is to go to Convert to Profile. And this time I go from Adobe RGB to ProPhoto. ProPhoto is pretty much one of the larger color profiles. And I click OK. And have you seen this line here? No. I undo it and I do it. I undo it and I do it. And now I have to focus here on this area. I undo it and I do it. I undo it and I do it. No change here, but we have changes here. So we have converted this now to a profile. And now have a look. I go here to my brush. I have changed nothing here in the colors, 127. And I paint here on it. That looks quite different, right? So when I go now back, Edit, Convert to Profile, and I convert this back to Adobe RGB 1998. No change here, but these guys have changed. So same play here, back and forth, and back and forth. You see that these numbers that we have here, 139 now, and 127, this is back, but the 127 that I have just painted here, these are now different, and now I have here even 3 values. So to demonstrate this a little bit more, because when the compression eats everything away, we need here maybe levels. And levels gives me here exactly where the pixels live at the moment, so I can spread them out. And now they go from, this little guy goes here directly to 0, and this little guy here goes to the highest value here, 255. And now you can see this is, when we magnify the differences, exactly what we have done to one value. 127 was always the original value. We just went one time back and forth. This is the problem that we have when we rely solely on values. It's sometimes pretty critical. So this would be one area of problem. The next problem area is when we do not take our gray card to calibrate first our exposure to the right values to finally take a good measurement of the Macbeth chart. The next problem would be then if we change the direction of the Macbeth chart all the time, so the light is reflected in a different way. Same happens if we do not take care of the right angle of the gray card. We have discussed this. And then finally, if we do not take a good care about the profiles that we create. If we just take one image on the morning, take a profile, and then hope that we get away the whole day shooting with the same profile. And there's certainly a little bit more, but I hope I have covered now an area where we run into problems when we try to get everything in the same way. So have an eye on that. Keep the profiles very clean. I suggest always to stay in one only. Don't step back and forth and do things between these steps. And of course, be very careful that everything is illuminated evenly on the Macbeth chart. Otherwise, the reading will be off, the profile will be off, and the whole work is just for the trash can. I say thanks for listening. Have fun with it. Bye bye.